I'm Sandy Rosenberg. I'm a member of the Maryland General Assembly, District 41, represent Northwest and West Baltimore, and that includes Park Heights from basically Woodland north to the city line. Well, I was born and grew up at Park Heights in Strathmore. That meant I went to Cross Country Elementary School and then Pimlico Junior High. I don't think there was a neighborhood association in those days, but today that would be Cross Country. I was born in 1950, and Cross Country Elementary School opened the year I went there for kindergarten, 1955. So I was in the first class that went all the way through from kindergarten in those days to sixth grade, not K to 8, because then you went to Pimlico Junior High, which then became Pimlico Middle School, which then became the Police Training Academy. And now, as an elected official, one of the issues before us is what takes the place of the Training Academy. So I have a connection, roots to. Well, I had a very good friend, Bruce Posner, and he lived 2 blocks away. So we would spend a lot of time together after school. On my mother's side of the family, I'm a Hecht. So when we did our shopping, we went to the Hecht Company. And that meant very rarely would we go downtown. But my recollection is we would go to Northwood until the store opened at Reisterstown Road Plaza, and then we would go to the plaza. So in terms of shopping, that's my memory, is the Hecht Company. And maybe the A&P out Reisterstown Road, just below, somewhere between Old Court and Slade nowadays, across from what was and I think will again be Jilly's. And the one Northwest Baltimore place that I went to a great deal was the racetrack, because Jay Slater was a friend from elementary school, and we remained friends. We were even through high school and so on. And Jay lived across the street from the racetrack at Rogers and Merville Avenues at what is the head of the stretch. So we would watch the races from his house, either from his attic window. Sometimes we'd go up on the roof and with binoculars and watch the races. And as we got, say, high school, we would occasionally go inside and the racetrack and bet. Well, I guess some of my fondest memories in terms of Northwest Baltimore have to do with the racetrack. My friend Jay Slater and I left at the end of the day, one November, when we were in 8th grade at Pimlico Junior High. We were going to his house, middle of the afternoon. We weren't playing hooky, but it was 2-something in the afternoon. And we noticed people were walking out of the track in the middle of the afternoon, and that the flag was at half-staff. And someone told us that the president had been shot. So I was in Jay's house with his immigrant father, who ran Slater's Grocery. It was his store. When Cronkite came on the air and took off his glasses and said at 2:40 p.m., President Kennedy is dead. So that's a very sharp memory from my youth. Yeah, my parents moved to 6304 Wallace Avenue, I think a month after I was born. But they grew up, my mother grew up at Park Heights in Shelburne, and my father grew up at, which is just above 7 Mile Lane, the last street before you get to Slade Avenue and the city-county line. And my father grew up on Vickers Road and Hilton, 3 or 4 blocks west of Lake Ashburton. We don't know much. I'm not aware of much about our neighborhood. I'm not aware of much about our neighborhood prior to the 50s when we moved in. So there were, obviously there was the baby boom, which meant that there was a need for a new school. My older brother, who's 2 years older, he went to Falstaff for kindergarten and first grade until cross country opened. So there was, a baby boom that resulted in the building of cross country. And now I'm dealing with as a legislator, the gut renovation, or really, no, they're building a new cross country elementary school because of the flood concerns of Western Run. But I do not know anything other than, that my mother, that was the country. When she grew up, she was born in 1924, when she grew up at Park Heights and Shelburne. And let's see, I also know that we belong to our Sinai congregation, which is Park Heights and Strathmore, a block west of our house. And Har Sinai was the Maryland Country Club golf course, or at least a portion of it, before it was bought by the congregation. Similarly, you have, not in Park Heights, but what is now Cross Keys was the Baltimore Country Club golf course until it was bought by the Rouse Company, say in the 60s. That's really the demographic history that I know. I would add, looking backwards from when I was born, Chai has played a very important role in terms of the housing and neighborhood issues in the Park Heights community, on stretching above and below Northern Parkway. And the genesis for that was a visit that a dozen of us made to Cleveland to see what was being done with similar issues about gentrification and the Jewish community continuing to move, out of into the suburbs. But I was part of that trip to Cleveland. There are lots of people who claim they were on that trip after the fact, but I was one of about a dozen people. Shoshana Cardin was the lead person on the trip. But that's been Chai has played a crucial role in the well-being of the community, and that began with that trip that we took to Cleveland. In the early 1980s, a group of us from the Associated Jewish Charities went to Cleveland to see what they were doing in terms of neighborhood redevelopment issues in an older Jewish neighborhood where there was also movement out into the suburbs of Cleveland. And that was an issue in Baltimore, in Northwest Baltimore. I mean, when Jews arrived, whether it was in the 19th century or the 20th century, you got off the boat. And initially it was in Fells Point, people also in Locust Point, and then the Jewish community gradually kept moving northwest to Utah Place, Reservoir Hill, Park Heights, Forest Park, and what that trip was the genesis for all of the work that Chai has done over the last 3 decades plus, working with the Jewish community, the African American community, to stabilize all of those neighborhoods, again, on both sides of Northern Parkway. Diverse neighborhoods need to work together. That's one of the very important, essential things that I do as a legislator, is try to work with the diverse communities that I represent throughout Northwest and West Baltimore. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the issues before us in 2021 is the future of Pimlico Junior High, the police training academy site. And that is an issue. The resolution of that issue has to be done in a way that is acceptable to both the Jewish community and the black community. And the only way that's going to happen is if both communities are around a table, talking through the issue, trying to find positive uses for that site.
One of the things.
See, my focus has been so much on bringing the black community and the Jewish community together that I don't look at things in the context of age and youth and seniors. But I'm sure that there have been youth who have volunteered to help seniors during the pandemic and to assist, whether it's your own grandparents or the neighbor, or to work through Meyerberg Senior Center to make sure that people don't lose out on essentials because they're unable to go anywhere because of the pandemic. I'm sure there's lots of that done in an organized way and a lot of it done one-on-one. Perhaps the best example of how the two communities, the Jewish community and the black community, have worked together would be what we've done thus far and what we hope to do in the long term with regard to the redevelopment of Pimlico Racetrack. I've spearheaded that effort to keep the track here, to not have the Jockey Club pick up and move everything to Laurel. And 2 years before the legislation was enacted that guarantees that the Preakness will stay here, the racetrack will stay here, and the site as a whole will be redeveloped, the majority of which will be redeveloped for non-racing uses. But for close to 2 years prior to the legislation being enacted to save Pimlico, I brought together the neighborhoods immediately surrounding the racetrack. And it's sort of a microcosm of the neighborhood demographics of Park Heights, because you have predominantly, but not exclusively, white neighborhoods to the north, middle income, so on. And to the south, you've got some good home ownership neighborhoods, especially closer to Sinai, as opposed to the neighborhoods closer to Park Heights, where we're going to get the job done to improve those neighborhoods, and there's some work underway already. But those neighborhoods were sitting around the table for a good 2 years talking about what their interests were with regard to a redeveloped Pimlico. And the very significant result of that conversation was a community compact, the Pimlico Community Compact, signed by the mayor, signed by neighborhood presidents, and other people, other officials, that provides that on an ongoing basis, the Stadium Authority, the Maryland Stadium Authority, is responsible for rebuilding the racetrack. The Baltimore Development Corporation is then likely to be responsible for redeveloping the site, the racetrack site, for non-racing uses, for recreation, commercial, residential, medical, so on, along with Sinai. But the end result of our 2 years of conversation was this compact that puts in writing that the neighborhoods will continue to talk, will continue to be around the table, but for the future, so will the powers that be. So will the Stadium Authority, so will the City of Baltimore. And certain issues, if there's zoning or planning issues, the zoning board's still going to make those decisions. But this is an opportunity for there to be input and consultation with the neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods that are affected by what happens at Pimlico from the outset, not to be presented with a fait accompli and can we get your support for this, but to have an input into the very important decisions that are made about the use of the Pimlico site. But it began with pretty largely my initiative 2 or 3 years ago, saying, ultimately, if we win this fight and if we keep the track, there are going to be decisions that need to be made, and we want the neighbors to have fallen into the practice of working with each other to get to discuss concerns, and then, in this instance, to get the right thing done. My hope for the future of Pimlico is that it has positive impact on all sides of the track, that their home ownership and good rental opportunities for housing, jobs for people who live in the Pimlico community, business opportunities for the neighbors, but that it will be an attractive place to go. And there's already significant housing, new housing construction underway or awarded south of the racetrack. We're going to bring back the Pratt Library. That's something that we've used slots money to do the study. We're now trying to decide how do you finance building the library. But when I grew up, I went to the library at Park Heights and Garrison. And the planning is that the new library would be about 2 blocks south of there, basically at Park Heights and Woodland. But we need to figure out how we're going to finance it. But that's a part of the redevelopment that is sparked by what goes on at the Pimlico racetrack site, both for racing and for those other uses, those other non-racing. Well, losing the Preakness would have been a big blow to the city, to the region, and obviously to Northwest Baltimore. The first conversation I had with Bill Cole, who was then the head of the Baltimore City Development Corporation, and has remained a great positive force in moving us as far as we've come thus far, and he will help get us to the finish line. But he said, it's just like the Bullets. There was a professional basketball team in Baltimore, in the NBA, the Baltimore Bullets. And first they played a few games a year in Washington, but as Charlie Ekman, great Baltimore figure, would say, they were calling a cab. They were leaving. And that was the process. And it would have been a big blow to the city, to the region, to the neighborhoods, for the Preakness to move to, as Charlie Ekman would say, lovely Laurel. But you do have the Preakness every year, and all the positive things that brings in terms of tourist dollars, in terms of attention paid to the city. And that's what we've won by keeping the Preakness here, keeping racing here, and redeveloping a majority of the site for uses that every day of the year, not just Preakness Week, will benefit the Northwest Baltimore community.